Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com. Also, WFOV 92.1, and we are very glad to have you with us today, Monday. This is the 1st of October, and we are going to start our program at the right time at the 1st of the month. And we're very glad that all of you are here with us this afternoon. As you know, we come on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're here from 2 to 3 on Mondays. And we re-air the program again on WFOV 92.1 on Saturdays at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Or you can catch us on YouTube at your leisure, and we are up and running around 1 hour after the program is taped, and we look forward to you joining us at that time as well. I want to again thank Mr. Paul Herring over there at 92.1 for the fine job he's doing. I do consider Paul to be a visionary here in the city of Flint, and he's doing a great job of being the person that came up with the idea of starting that studio over there, and that network is off and running. We're off and running here too at allpointstv.com. I want to thank the technicians here. We're having some technical problems at the studio today with the sound, but I think we'll be able to run the program, and we will do the best we can with the audio being down somewhat in the studio. Well, you've been watching the news, so you know what's going on out there in terms of the cesspool of the nation, and you're getting a better sense watching what is happening in Washington, a better sense of what De Lorenzo was talking about in his book called Throw Them All Out, and this cesspool that we have as the capital of the nation, where the politicians are running the country in the ground and doing what they want to do, just doing things that really have no place in a democratic country, and one that's supposed to be based upon a Republican form of government, where we are the ones dictating to our leaders what they will and will not do. And as you can see, these people are out of control, and they are running a good man down. You know, anytime you have to go back to a person, I'm talking here about Brett Kavanaugh, anytime you have to go back to a man's childhood and find some things that he did out at the time that he was in high school, and go into the yearbook and find some things there that he might have written or were written about him, and have that as a basis of you seeing if he's qualified to be on the Supreme Court bench, and you bypass the man's record. The man has been on the second highest court in the country, and that is the second court in the nation's capital. And you have to go back to the time when the man was a teenager to find something that you can hold against him to try to keep him off the bench. Then that's a pretty sad day for this country, to be holding a person up to the light because of some discrepancies that took place when you were when he was a teenager. And if that becomes the standard, I don't know about your teenage years. John, I don't know what kind of teenage years you had, but if you start holding my teenage years up to the light, as much of a headache that I was to my mom, and how I was having to be my mom was reforming me every day. And so if you go back into my childhood and start bringing up what I did when I was in my teens, 17 years of age, 18 years of age, and before that, then I would really be in trouble. And this man has been in the court system, for the last 12 years. And if you can't find anything to go against this man's nomination in the time he's been on the bench, and everyone's been laudatory about his treatment of people as a federal judge, and you can't find anything to come against him during the time that he's been a judge, and you go to his childhood and start bringing that up, and you bypass the record that is really the record that's relevant is what has he done that he's been on the bench, because that would give you some indication of what he's going to do as a member of the Supreme Court. And I agree with them in saying it's a lifetime term. We have to be careful who we put on the bench, but he's already proven the kind of judge he's going to be by the fact that we have a track record. And look at the paper trail the man has placed out there. But that's not good enough, and they're trying to prevent him from going to the bench, not because he's not qualified, but because they know he's going to be more or less of a staunch conservative. He's going to swing the court over to the right, and these people on the Democratic side, where they've actually swung the Democratic Party away from the party of John F. Kennedy and some of the others, the more moderate Democrats. This party now is a Marxist party, and they know that what's going to happen if Kavanaugh is confirmed, he's going to swing the court over to the right of center, and that does not fit into what they had in mind. They did not intend for this president to be making these appointments. And if they do not stop Kavanaugh, then everything they had in the works to turn this country over to the left and bring about socialism, which is what they have in mind, the vision they have is not the vision of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and some of the other founders. Their vision is the vision of Karl Marx and some of these other radicals. So you can see what they're trying to do. They have to stop this man in his tracks. And it has nothing really to do with the character of Kavanaugh, because they got character witnesses that have said this man, none of what they're saying about this man fits in what they know about him. I don't know how many of us could get 65 of our high school classmates, people we've known all of our lives, from our childhood up until the time that we are now operating, that will come to our rescue and say the kind of things about us that said about Kavanaugh. I don't know. I'm going back into my own high school, and I was a good student, but I had a lot of enemies because I was a good student. So I don't think I get a lot. I could get a few, but I don't know if I can get 65 of my classmates who will write letters of commendation of my character back in that time period. And I wasn't that wild. Now, I'm not saying that I was out of control in school. I was a very good student in school. I was very focused. But I'm going back there. I had a class of 413 people, and I don't know if I can get 65 persons to write something that would say he was this kind of a person, he did these wonderful things, as it did about Kavanaugh. But they're saying that about him. And that should count for something, particularly when you have a he said and she said type of thing here, where you don't have, and it's not really he said and she said in Kavanaugh's case, because it's she said, they said, because the person has charged him, Christine Ford, that has charged him with attempted rape. Kavanaugh's been charged. She's saying that 36 years ago, that Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge pushed her in a room, and they went up the stairs, and she was going to the bathroom apparently, and went up the stairs, and one of them was both of them were behind her. One of them pushed her in the room, and she's now on the bed, and they're trying, and Brett Kavanaugh, out of character by what everybody else is saying about this man, tried to rape her. And she said that she really thought her life was in danger, that he could have inadvertently killed her. Now, there are, by her own testimony, 6 people at this affair. There were 4 boys. She named 3 of them, and 2 girls. She was there, of course, and then the other person was a friend of hers named Leland Kaiser. So the testimony that she gave in the hearing by these persons that are on that on the Senate Judiciary Committee, you ought to go and look at some of these guys and look at their baggage, and see as happened last night on Fox, where they had on the program called "The Revolution." The next revolution will be televised. He was putting out there some of the ones on that committee, such as the leading Democrat Feinstein, Blumenthal, Lehigh. What's the other persons on that committee? Some of these other persons that you would think they have a perfect record. Cory Booker. Cory Booker should definitely keep his mouth closed in front of blacks, because Cory Booker had, as one of the persons that was on his campaign staff, the person who killed Malcolm X. William Bradley was a shotgun, the one that came down the aisle and was a shotgun shooter. That's well known now. Named by Thomas Hare, who was one of the two persons caught at the scene of the crime when Malcolm was assassinated on the 21st of February 1965. William Bradley was a shotgun shooter, and that's not disputed by anyone that knows the details of this assassination. And Booker, who is from Newark, you know, those killers that came out of one of the mosques came out of Temple 25. In other words, the 25th temple set up in the Nation of Islam is a temple in New Jersey, which is Booker's home front. And I've seen pictures of William Bradley in the literature of this man. But black America's not going to call him on it because he's a Democrat. But he should keep his mouth closed about someone having baggage. And then he also has admitted that when he was 15 years old in high school, he groped a woman. He's admitted to that. And they're up here acting like an accusation. They don't have anyone that verifies what Brett Kavanaugh did, and they act like the accusation is proof. It used to be we had this thing about guilt by association. And we all knew that was wrong. So we would say, you are convicting somebody by the association. Well, now we have guilt by accusation. If you accuse someone of something because the accusation has been made, then the accusation is proof. But it's not even in this case right here. He said and she said, and all these people on that Judiciary Committee, every last one of them, as you go down the line and look at their baggage, as Hilton did in this program last night on Fox, every last one of them have baggage. And Cory Booker, the baggage that he has, not only has he done the same thing they're accusing Kavanaugh of doing, and he has admitted to it, he's also disrespecting the black community by taking a person who was involved in the assassination of an icon, and he has this man on his literature. William Bradley is known to be the shotgun killer, the one that fired the first blast at Malcolm X. Nobody's calling this man on this, and has the nerve to talk about he has a Spartacus moment. If you have a Spartacus moment, you should in fact apologize to the black community for having run as a senator from New Jersey and not checking out, and that would be astounding not to be aware of Bradley's background, because everyone knows anyone that knows the history of that assassination knows William Bradley was involved in it. And in fact, I'll tell you another thing while we're on this point. There were two persons that were caught at the scene of the crime. There were two persons caught. Thomas Hare was one. The other person that was there were two persons shot by Reuben Francis. Thomas Hare was shot in the thigh, and they caught him at the scene. There's another person that, if you go back and read the record, you saw where the New York Times came out and said there were 2 persons that were caught at the scene of the assassination. And then later on in the evening edition, it said 1 person was in fact caught. There were 2 persons caught. The other person was a person from Farrakhan's mosque. That's you, Louis Farrakhan, from Farrakhan's mosque. Farrakhan's mosque was mosque number 11. And Farrakhan, who rode from Boston, they left out on the 21st, early that Sunday morning, on the 21st of February, and they rotated out of the Boston Mosque into the Newark Mosque, and that was Farrakhan and Clarence 2X Gill that rotated out of the Boston Mosque into the Newark Mosque, and then the Newark Mosque, 5 guys rotated out of that mosque and went into New York. And that was the assassination team. 4 of them were on the assassination itself, but there was a 5th person they picked up in New York, and that was let me get his name, Norman 3X Butler, who was who they're now trying to say was innocent, but he's the one that was identified by. He's the one that Sharon Poole was talking about. She didn't identify him, didn't call his name out, but the one when they asked her, Sharon 6X Poole, when they asked her who she thought did it in the aftermath of the assassination, she said the Muslims did it because they're down there, because they had come out of mosque number 7, so they knew who some of those persons were. The person she was talking about, not that she ever named them, but the person she was talking about was Norman 3X Butler, who did serve time. But there was another person that there were 4 others involved in the assassination. 2 of them were shot at the scene, and 2 of them served time, but 3 of them never served any time. And the one that was shot at the scene was Clarence 2X Gill was shot also, and he was a lieutenant in Boston, and under Farrakhan. And Farrakhan admits that he was that he gave some of the atmosphere. He admits that helped creating the atmosphere, but it's more than that. There's more to be answered to than that. But how is William Bradley, on the literature for Cory Booker when Cory Booker is running for the senatorial seat? Because it's well known in Newark that the killers came out of Temple 25, and so Booker needs to close his mouth. And look at what you said that you did when you were 15 years old in the high school that you were in, and you admitted on the record that you groped a girl when you were there. Now, it's not he said, she said, in this case with Brett Kavanaugh. Everyone that was at that party, 6 people were there, including Christine Ford. There were 6 people at that party, 2 girls, 4 guys. One of the persons there was Leland Kaiser, who is the best friend still the best friend, one of the good friends of Christine Ford. And she says that she believes Ford, but she cannot verify what she said occurred at that party because she wasn't aware of that, which I think that's quite astounding. Because what was being alleged by Ford is that those guys were drunk, and she was able to get out of that room, go across the hallway into the bathroom, and when those 2 guys came downstairs, which means they would have come downstairs before she left the bathroom, she had to come downstairs and go between them, among them, in order to get out of the house. Downstairs, Leland Kaiser is down there. So she passes by Leland Kaiser. She passes by the 2 persons that attacked her and ran out of the house, wanted to get out of the house. She cannot tell us how she got home. And what came out in the testimony is that she was, her house at that time was 6 to 8 miles away from the event. So she didn't walk home. But she can't tell you who the driver was. She can't tell you who the driver was that brought her there, and she can't tell you who the driver was that took her home. And that's astounding, because she named, let's see, 3 of the 4 guys that were there. She named them, and she named Leland Kaiser. So she named the other 3 of the 4 boys that were there. She knew Leland Kaiser was there, but she didn't know who the person was that took her home after the attack, which that would be crucial to have that person identified, because we can then find out the state that she was in. We know she didn't walk home. And then the question becomes one, we didn't have cell phones then, so the question becomes, who would that person have been that took her home? Because there's no way you can call, you're outside the house. So she couldn't have called anybody to take her home. And these holes that are in her testimony were pointed out by the person that did an unbelievable job in interrogating her. I think Rachel Mitchell did an excellent job. I don't know what Alan Dershowitz was talking about when they said that she did not do a good job in interrogating. I suggest you go look at the tape of the interrogation without them going back and forth from one to the other. What they did in the hearing is that they had 5 minutes of in the interrogation by Rachel Mitchell. You know, Rachel Mitchell was the one that the men, since all of the Republicans were male, they didn't want to be seen as badgering the witness. So what they did is they gave their time, the 11 members of the Republican Party, they were on the Senate Judiciary Committee, they gave their 5 minutes to Rachel Mitchell. So it was going 5 minutes of this Republican, and she would quiz Ford 5 minutes. Then they go to the Democrats. Then it would go back to the next person, and then Ford would be asked questions again by Rachel Mitchell, and it kept going back and forth. So it's being cut up, and you didn't think she was doing a good job, but she laid a foundation over time in 5-minute increments of the testimony that was being put out by Ford to show calmly that it wasn't adding up. In the end, it wasn't adding up to this woman's story being legitimate. For example, they laid the foundation for her saying that she didn't want to come to Washington at first because she didn't like to fly. She didn't like to get on airplanes. And what came out in that testimony is that she was flying all the time. I mean, it was amazing how often this lady was on planes going across the water, going to different parts of the world, and flying as a result of her job. This woman was on airlines all the time. And it was not a matter of her going to Washington. They also tried to accommodate her by going where she was, to California. They were willing to interview her in California. But and so they asked her, how did you get to Washington? She flew to Washington, from California to Washington. She flew there. And she was saying that she didn't like flying. She was always flying. The testimony was very clear about that. And it was very methodically brought out. There were very many inconsistencies in her testimony. And that was one of the highlights for me in terms of her saying that she didn't want to come to Washington. She was reluctant to testify because she did not want to go to Washington. I think that her story was, I think that she was not really so much about her story being validated. Anyway, that was just one of the discrepancies that they had there. The other one was how did she get home? Who took her home? 4 guys were there. She couldn't name the fourth guy. She knew three of them, and she could not remember which person took her home. It's only four guys that were there. The three of them. We're going to take a break. I can't hear the sound in the studio, so we are going to assume that it's time to take a break, and then John, you'll let me know when the break is over from WFOV. Okay, so we'll see you on the other side of the break. Hope you come back in 4 minutes. Okay, I'll just have to say I was not impressed with Ford's testimony. I just didn't think that it added up. And this man has had an impeccable career, and women that he's worked with, not one person that he's worked with over the course of his career had anything other than laudatory things to say about him. And that's both women who are Democrats and women that are Republicans. They were laudatory about this man. Brett Kavanaugh has an impeccable, sterling record, and they were trying to act like this man was a rapist. These last two persons that came up and made these allegations, one of them was saying that the last one was saying that he was standing in line, that she went to 10 different parties where Brett Kavanaugh and others were lining up in the hallway, had these women that had been given something that knocked them out, and they're in this room and they're lining up to go in this room one after the other, and they are in fact gang raping these person in the room. And she said that she went to these parties 10 times where that occurred, and they were able to go back and look at her background. She was a student in college, so she's going back to the high school where there are minors, and she's seeing minors being raped, and she's an adult at this point, and she doesn't do anything, going to these parties over a period of 10 different times to where she was eventually raped. And they want us to believe through Avenatti, who is the same attorney for Daniels, the one that filed against the president. They want to make the claim, this lawyer wants to make the claim that Kavanaugh was involved, through his client making the claim that Kavanaugh was involved in these rapes over and over again, which those that heard that testimony that same day wrote again to the Senate Judiciary Committee and said, that's pure nonsense. It doesn't fit the man that we knew. Now, they're talking about another person there, Mark Judge. Mark Judge is the other person supposed to have been in that room. And I was noticing that the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee were saying that when he said he had no recollection of it, they're saying, well, that's not a denial. All they're saying is that all he's saying is that he does not recall it. Well, he wrote to the Senate Judiciary Committee, sent a letter to Grassley, and sent the letter to the ranking Democrat, who was Feinstein. And he said that what was described in that hearing by Ford is a character he had never seen in Brett Kavanaugh. So if you wanted a more specific denial of the event, you saw it in terms of him saying he had never seen Brett Kavanaugh act in the manner in which Ford had described him at that affair. And no one has agreed, none of those persons at the party, at that event, agree that they saw this or witnessed this or saw her being disheveled because of that at that particular event. No one has verified it. So it's not just he said and she said in this case here. It is she said, and it's also is they said, because all the others, including her friend Leland Kaiser, have all verified what Brett Kavanaugh is talking about. Okay, I'm glad you're back. Those from WFOV. So there's some real problems here. Now, we have another week in which they're going to do the investigation by the FBI is now doing an investigation, and they're saying that the investigation will be done it should be done within a week's time. Really, this can be done in 2 or 3 days, but let's say they'll do it between now and the end of the week. Then this vote should take place then by the 1st of next week, probably Tuesday of next week. If they do not get Kavanaugh on that bench, based upon these allegations, these unproven allegations, what do you think will be the effect on the Republican Party and on the base if Kavanaugh is not confirmed on the court and you have a majority in the Senate? The Senate, of course, is by Article 2. The Senate is given the responsibility of endorsing the nominee of the president. In other words, the president makes a nomination, and then through the advise and consent decree in Article 2, then the Senate will in fact confirm through advise and consent of the endorsement, they will endorse the president's nominee. Without that, majority of the persons voting for it that is not confirmed. Can you imagine what would happen if you have a majority of members in the Senate that are Republicans, and the Republican Party does not in fact confirm the nominee? Do you know what that would do in terms of the base coming out in November the 6th? I mean, I know what I would do. I mean, if you cannot get a person confirmed and you are the majority, then what would be the purpose of having the majority? I wouldn't go there and vote for the maintenance of majority of Republicans. Not that I'd be voting for these crazy Democrats, but I wouldn't be voting for the Republican Party, because what would be the purpose of voting for a party that's already in the majority and they cannot get its nominee through? What would be the purpose of continuing to endorse that? And then really, to be honest with you, it's too bad that both political parties cannot lose, because both parties are bad. But sometimes your vote has to be a defensive vote. And because the Democrats are so bad and so out of control, you have to sometimes serve as a blocker. Not that I have any confidence in either one of the parties. They're both criminal outfits. The Democratic Party, the Republican Party, I don't see either one of them standing upon the Constitution. But let's admit that one is more out of control than the other. And so therefore, blocking one, given how dangerous that they are, that's how my vote is going to be a defensive vote, not an endorsement of the Republican Party or an endorsement of these politicians. My vote is to stop some things from happening that would happen if the other party was in the majority. And I can't even imagine where this country would be if the Republican Party was in the minority. Not that the Republican Party is anything to brag about. These are criminal enterprises in the nation's capital. But let's understand that given what we have here, one at this point in time is worse than the other. And at least by having a majority Republican Party, they cannot hide behind not endorsing the president who is president in the Republican Party. They at least have to give some credence to the fact that they're Republicans by endorsing to an extent what the president's in fact doing. Okay, we just have to be on guard here. But if they cannot get Kavanaugh through, that's going to be a travesty for the Republican Party. Because unlike what they're saying, that the base will come out because look what those Democrats did by defeating Kavanaugh, that's not the way it's going to play out. If they don't get Kavanaugh through, then what's going to happen there is they are going to stay home. And the Democrats are going to be energized to come out and vote. It's going to be a tsunami at the polls if they can't get Kavanaugh through. Because the voters are not going to go there and endorse these Republicans when they cannot even stand on the nominee, which is one of the best nominees they've had for the Supreme Court in the history of the court. Everyone knows this man is thoroughly qualified. And that would really just be a travesty that they would not be able to get Kavanaugh on the court, given this man's record. This man has an impeccable record. We have a scholar. This man is a scholar. And everyone that has been in this man's purview testified to this man's tremendous understanding of the Constitution. And everybody knows this man is a constitutionalist. He's not, I wouldn't even call him so much a conservative. He's a constitutionalist. And his rulings have been so constitutionally grounded that they've used some of his writings on the Supreme Court. 12 things he said in his rulings have been adopted by the Supreme Court. And I don't know when this ever happened before. You take Sotomayor, for example. 6 of her court rulings were appealed to the Supreme Court when she was a circuit court judge. And 4 of those 6 rulings that were appealed to the Supreme Court, 4 of them were overturned by the court. That's 2/3 of the case rulings that she had in her court. 2/3 of them were overturned by the Supreme Court. If she's qualified to sit on that bench of the Supreme Court, then Kavanaugh is super qualified to sit on the Supreme Court. And there's no doubt about the qualification. And just as we thought they were getting ready to confirm Kavanaugh, and everything was going down the line toward the confirmation, at the 12th hour, they bring up these allegations, which Feinstein, and in this investigation, we need to investigate Feinstein. Because Feinstein had 2 months, she had these allegations made by Ford and didn't apprise anyone that those allegations had been made. And then at the last minute, they spring these allegations on the committee. Just as they were getting ready to go through confirmation, she springs them on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the case is opened back up again. And these quislings in the Republican Party want to now open the process back up. Otherwise, they'll lose the votes of Murkowski from Alaska, Susan Collins in Maine, this Jeff Flake. Give me a break with Flake. Flake was going to vote for the nominee until he was on the elevator, and there was this lady out there hollering at him. He got intimidated by the person out there hollering at him, and the woman's out there making nonsensical claims, saying that he didn't care anything about her being a Me Too member by having no sympathy for what had happened to her because she had been raped. And this man backs down rather than standing up and saying that doesn't have anything to do with the case that we're considering there. And I dare you to blame Kavanaugh for what happened to her. That's a whole different case. And he backed down and was changed his mind and said that, first of all, he voted for the 11-10. There were 11 Republicans voted for it to come out of committee, but Flake voted for it to come out of committee only if on the floor, before it's voted upon the floor, they would do a further investigation of Kavanaugh, who's already been investigated 6 times, and nothing has been found in a thorough investigation of this man's background on 6 different occasions. So now we're going to go through a 7th occasion, and they're not going to find anything new because the ones that have already testified about where Kavanaugh is, as far as what he did, they've already testified to they cannot verify her story. So what are they going to say now? When they've already sworn that what she said happened, they cannot verify it happening. And now Mark Judge has come out and said that the event that has been described by Ford did not take place at that party. So this case is already closed, and there are no witnesses to it they can verify for a story, yet there are 1, 2, 3. There's 3, 1, 2, 3. There are 4 of the 6 people that were there, 4 of the 6 that are saying no. One person she never identified was there, and then the only person that's verifying it on the other side is the person making the accusation. So anyway, we have a real bad situation here as far as I'm concerned, because if you can stop a person from being confirmed by an accusation by a single person, then none of us are safe. If the accusation is guilt today, if the standard has been lowered, so to accuse someone, the person therefore is guilty because they've been charged, they've been accused, then we're all in jeopardy, because an accusation can be made by anybody anytime, going back into as far back as your childhood. And I don't know what effect it's going to have upon the future candidates for office, because if you can do to Kavanaugh what's been done to him, then with the record that he had, then nobody would be willing to. I mean, who would be willing to stand up there and have their record for a lifetime open to public scrutiny? And who could pass a test where an allegation is made, and now you got to, in fact, prove your innocence, other than what used to be, where before this case, you were innocent until proven guilty. And now the standard's been changed that if you're accused, you have to prove your innocence. That's a different standard. They flipped the script. And now the person that has been charged through an accusation, the person now must prove that the accusation is in fact wrong by them proving that it did not occur as the accuser is saying. That standard has been changed. And I don't know how we can prove a negative, because how do you do that? A charge has been made. There are no witnesses to it that are verifying that, but you have to prove, because a charge has been made, you have to prove that it didn't happen. Yet the ones that were there said it didn't happen. They didn't see it. And she can't tell the date, didn't know the place that it occurred in, didn't know the time period in which it occurred, and they expect the FBI to go and do an investigation when they don't even have the record of what time period are they investigating this matter. And there's no forensic evidence that's available right now, because where would the forensic evidence be? You don't even know where the place was, where it was alleged to have taken place. So that's all these problems here. And we're going to stop the confirmation based on these allegations that cannot be proven or disproven, but all the weight is on the side of the person that has been accused. So anyway, that's a problem. And it's a problem for them to have stopped this confirmation, because now the bar has been lowered, and now when you have a person coming behind Ford, anybody can do what Ford did. Nobody is safe, and that's going to be a problem in the future. It's laying there's a lot of groundwork being laid here that's causing a tremendous problem for future candidates. Okay, that's one thing I want to talk about in terms of that element. The other thing that I wanted to come here and talk about today, has to do with an article that appeared in the Flint Journal. Violent crime rate. Talking about the violent crime rate in Flint. And the violent crime rate in Flint, the article says the violent crime rate climbs. And in the article it talks about the crime rate in Flint has the 6th highest crime rate in the United States for citizens over 50,000 persons. And in the crime rate, when you go back and look at it throughout the country in terms of the crime rate, you find out some things along this line. I said Flint is number 6. The first one on that list in terms of the highest crime rate in the country is St. Louis. So here's what I did some research on these cities that have the top 10 that have these high crime rates. St. Louis is number 1. So what do they have in common? Well, let's see what they have in common here. 49.2% of St. Louis has is 49.2% is black. Of that 49.2% in St. Louis, 92% of the homicides are by blacks in St. Louis. 78% of the rapes in St. Louis are by blacks. 93% of the robberies are by blacks. 87% of the aggravated assaults by blacks. 85% of the burglaries in St. Louis. Detroit, which is number 2, you look at similar numbers that are there. Since we talk a lot about Chicago, if you go to Chicago, if Chicago were all white, its murder rate would go down by 90%. The rape would go down by 81%. The robbery would go down by 90%. In New York, if it were all white, the murder rate would drop by 91%. Robbery would drop by 81%. Shootings would drop by 97%. Now we have got to look at these numbers in Flint. And we've got to look at these numbers throughout the country and to find out what's going on here. Because somebody is lying. In terms of the interracial attacks in this country, let us say, we talk about, and I hear a lot of these commentators saying that you have white on white crime in terms of whites murdering whites, blacks murder blacks, because that's who they are around. Well, you look at these statistics, the color of crime, and what you find out is that the color of crime shows that those numbers of whites killing whites, blacks killing blacks, and so on and so forth, and those attacks, those interracial attacks, are groups attacking their own members, and that's a norm. That's not true either. In looking at those statistics, I saw, when I went and looked at those statistics, what you see here is of the interracial attacks in this country, 85% of the interracial attacks in this country are minority groups. Let me get this right. 85% are minorities making attacks on whites. 15% are interracial attacks of whites against, in terms of other, ethnic groups. So this idea of racist attacks causing the attacks in the country is not verified by the facts. And the only reason I bring this out is because if we do not identify the problem, then we will continue to claim that the problem is caused by something that we're trying to remove out of the orbit of the problem, where that's not the problem at all. We're saying the problem is racism. But if that were the case, we see it in the statistics. We don't see that in the statistics. What we see is, in fact, blacks attack whites more in this country than they attack blacks in this country. We talk about black on black crime. There's also black on white crime. Blacks attack whites in this country 44% of the attacks by blacks. 43% of the attacks of blacks is by other blacks. But blacks attack whites more in this country than they attack blacks. And then whites attack blacks is a very minimum number. So this idea that we're overwhelmed by racism, or those football players out here kneeling because the idea is they're overwhelmed by racism, that is not borne out by the statistics. And we've got to get real about what the problems are. We have our politicians out of control, and we also have the black communities out of control. And those are just facts. I have a friend that lives out in one of the suburban communities. And I called, as soon as I arrived, and he says, come on in. He has his garage up, and bicycles hanging up on the walls in the garage. And the back door is open. He tells me to come on in. He's downstairs in the basement. And I go through the garage door, go in the house, and he's out there, got his garage up, living in an area where he doesn't even have his doors locked. Doesn't have the back door locked. And when I go in there, I tell him if I did that in my community, and I'm in the township, Flint Township, and I have bars up in the back of I'm in the suburb now of the township, but I'm so close to the crime in Flint that we have we're out there. We're beginning to put bars up in the back of our houses, and the question is, why is that? What is going on here? What do we have in common here? What do these communities have in common? All these top 10 cities that have this violent crime, what do they all have in common? In other words, what's the greatest predictor of the crime in these cities? And the greatest predictor of crime in those cities is the percentage of minorities in those cities. And that's just a fact. I don't say that with any glee. I say that because we've got to stop lying. The people in St. Louis do not have a police problem. There is the number of police officers that shoot unarmed blacks in this country is 0.6. And by the way, unarmed does not mean non-dangerous. And so they didn't attack the police in those cities, and they pulled back. And guess what's happening in these cities? Look at St. Louis. Look at Baltimore, where they were over there rioting because of this idea that the police were in fact shooting black people down for no reason. Look at Baltimore right now. Look in these cities where the police. Look in Cincinnati where they pulled back, and where they've emboldened the criminal element. That's what's happening in these communities, because we are not willing to admit that the black community is out of control because blacks are creating havoc in these communities, and that's what's going on in Flint. You're not safe. We're not safe in our communities because we're made unsafe by blacks in our community. I don't have bars up to my windows because the Klan's trying to get in my house. I got bars up to my window because the persons around me are creating a danger in my community. And that's just the way it is, and we've got to stop getting around the facts and dealing with non-issues and claiming that something is a problem when it's not the problem in the black community. Okay, that's my rant on that. We have a serious problem in Flint, and that problem is pouring out into other parts of Genesee County because there's a problem in the Flint community. I don't hear anyone in this city, any leaders in this city that is any leader in the city that is confronting this problem and talking about what the real problem is in the city that we're confronting, that they're confronting with in this town. We're not talking about this issue as it's being played out in Flint or in these other cities. We have a serious problem. The breakdown of order in the black community is a serious problem in this country. So we got a problem, a breakdown of order on the part of these politicians. That's a national problem. We got a problem right in our backyard we got to deal with. Okay, let me get out of here. I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.